The Battle of Pavia, fought on the 24th of February 1525, was the decisive military engagement of the war in Italy between King Francis I of France and the Habsburg Emperor Charles V. The French army of 28,000 was virtually annihilated, and Francis himself was left a prisoner of his arch-enemy, Charles. He was sent to Madrid, where the following year he concluded peace and surrendered French claims to Italy, exposing the land to Habsburg domination. In late 1524, Francis had marched into Lombardy and occupied Milan. He then laid siege to the imperial-controlled city of Pavia, about 40 kilometers to the south. Attached to the city was an area of walled gardens called Parco, where at the time most of the French camp was stationed. Emperor Charles sent an army under the Marchese di Pescara to relieve the siege. The imperial forces arrived outside Pavia and took up a position facing the French on the opposite side of a stream. After 3 weeks of wary skirmishing, Pescara led a bold attack. He staged a night march several miles to the north and forded the stream. For this, the imperial forces decided to dress themselves in white shirts, placed over the clothes and armor to carry out a night action. In this way, the attackers were recognized in the darkness by this garment. Landsknechts of the imperial side, along with Spanish and Italian infantrymen, attacked and overthrew the wall of the park and were able to access it at dawn on the 24th. By daybreak, a large part of the army was in place, threatening the open French left flank. Confused by fog that obscured the battlefield, the French commanders struggled to reorient their forces to meet the unexpected attack. Francis led his armored cavalry in a medieval-style charge with couched lances, a questionable tactic in the new age of gunpowder. His horsemen rode in front of his cannon, making it impossible for the artillery to fire on the enemy. Francis's Swiss mercenary pikemen showed no eagerness to fight, and forces under the Duke of Alençon failed to engage in the general confusion. There were landsknechts on both sides. On the side of the King of France, those called the Black Band, and on the imperial side, those led by the famous von Frundsberg. Swiss mercenaries at this time only served the French. However, the heavy cavalry of men-at-arms, called gendarmes, were the elite forces on the French side. Large, fast war horses were deployed, carrying knights who used the lance at the ready as shock troops. Axes or hammers were used for melee, and the sword was as a secondary option. At this time, it would still be possible to find mounts with barding, plates of armor that protected the horse. In France, cavalry had been developed to its maximum splendor. It was considered to have no rival. Thus, the French infantry had been neglected, usually resorting to Swiss and German mercenaries. That they were Swiss and German was important, since each nation had its own military tradition. Thus, the German peoples at this time relied on the pike square, and in addition to pikes and halberds, they resorted to the use of firearms as a secondary and minority weapon. In the case of the Battle of Pavia, it is testified that the majority of the landsknechts were pikemen and halberdiers, accompanied only by a small number of arquebusiers. On the contrary, Italians and Spaniards had inclined their affections to firearms, and thus one could see squadrons assembled with 2,000 musketeers or more. In 1525, the arquebus was not an unknown weapon, of course, but its use had more or less been limited to sieges and the defense of fortifications, rather than in the field. During the French siege and imperial relief operations, there are many contemporary testimonies by men-at-arms of various nations, French, Italian, Spanish, and Burgundian, of the use and importance of muskets and arquebuses. Authors of the time recognized that the impact of the Spanish infantry was powerful. Having a huge amount of musketry was extremely useful. It was the combination of both weapons, pike and firearm, which gave the advantage towards cavalry, as it was to be for the next 150 years. During the battle, an event marked a turning point in history for the mounted knight. Drilled Spanish arquebusiers fired their weapons en masse and took a heavy toll on the French cavalry, the veteran Duke of Tremoille, for instance, falling with a ball through the heart. Regarding the power of the barrage at close range, it is unquestionable that many men and horses fell pierced by lead balls. Some had the bullet go through the armor, and others, however, were saved by double-layered breastplates with superimposed pieces. But impacts in less protected areas, such as thighs or arms, could cause severe wounds. The Spanish firepower, which was to be key in this battle, and in the predominance of Spanish weapons on the fields of Europe in the 16th century, is confirmed in these few minutes. During another notable event in the battle, the Imperial Landsknecht mercenaries, under Georg von Frundsberg, surrounded the notorious Black Band renegades fighting for the French and annihilated them. The fighting was fierce, with dirty and bloody close-quarter combat, known as Bad War for its massive casualties. The Battle of Pavia had a considerable political military significance on the European stage. The news of the capture of King Francis I and a good part of the nobility of France spread by post throughout Europe, and the Spanish weapons gained eternal fame. Captured at Mirabello, just north of the city walls, Francis was carried off to Spain, where he was held for more than a year. Charles's victory marked the beginning of an era and the rise of power for the Habsburgs in Europe and the nascent Spanish Empire in the Americas.